Shabbat Shalom. Okay, we're sliding backwards. Shabbat Shalom. Okay, so the Parsha begins Va'ele HaMishpatim, and these are the laws. Okay, so the question is why and? Okay, and according to Rashi, whenever a parsha or a section says and, it's connected to what went before it. Okay, so last week, and we easier to remember because we always read the whole parsha for Yitro. So even though we're in year one, we also read the end of the parsha, right? And the end of the parsha was the 10 Commandments, right? And so Rashi says that the point of saying Va Ele HaMishpatim, and these are the laws, is that we now get into the nitty-gritty of civil and criminal law, and this is part of the revelation as well, right? And I have certainly heard people say to me, well, I believe the 10 Commandments were given by God at Mount Sinai, but not the rest of the Torah. Okay, and look, I can't tell you what to believe, and in fact, it always astonishes me when people try to tell people what to believe. I mean, people believe what they believe. Okay, and if you believe that the 10 Commandments were given at Sinai and nothing else, right? As they say in French, "Gay gesund behaved," right? But there's no basis in Judaism for that belief. Okay, that is your own private belief and you're entitled to it, but don't try to find a basis in Jewish thought, because there is none. And in fact, scholars of liturgy tell us, because if you look at the Siddur, right, a lot of key passages of the Torah appear in the service every day, right? Every day we read Shirat Hayam, every day we read Birkat Kohanim, but we don't have the 10 Commandments in the Siddur. Okay, and scholars of liturgy say that it was in the Siddur, and then when Christianity arose, they took it out. Okay, because the Christians said, or at least some Christians said, only the 10 Commandments were given at Sinai and not anything else. And they would point to the fact that we read the 10 Commandments every day. Right, so we don't read the 10 Commandments every day to take that argument away from it. So there is no separation of religious law and secular law in Judaism, right? As I said, there's nothing in the Parsha this week that deals with ritual, right? They say, oh, that's religious as opposed to civil or criminal, right? And this is a challenge because it's a challenge in a religiously pluralistic society, right? Because Judaism should impact everything that we do, but we don't live in a society that's all Jewish or that's governed by Jewish law, right? But if you're a lawyer, I can give you books on how to be an American lawyer and follow halacha, right? If you're a doctor, I can give you books how to be an American doctor and follow halacha, right? And it's astonishing to me, and I had this thought again watching the State of the Union, right? How, to be careful how to say this, right? Because you never know who's going to watch the video afterwards, right? But how disproportionately powerful American Jews are compared to our percentage of the population, right? We're like 2.5% of the population, right? And I'm looking at the cabinet come in, right? And the two most important cabinet members, right, Merrick Garland, right, and Tony Blinken, both Jews, Alejandro Mayorkas, a Jew, right, the spouse of the vice president, a Jew, right, the Senate majority leader, a Jew. I mean, we have a lot, right? George Santos, Jew-ish, right? I mean, we are way overrepresented, right? And it's because we live in a meritocracy, right? But it's, you know, I mean, I certainly, look, I'm glad that I'm pretty sure that Merrick Garland would not press for a capital punishment, right? I think that's not, but I don't think it would be cool if Garland said, you know, my rabbi told me that capital punishment in America is against halakha, so I can't, right? I mean, if you can't do your job, then you have to step down, right? I mean, John F. Kennedy established this principle when he was running for Senate, right? But if you look at a lot of the issues that our country faces, right? Jews and Catholics as a whole, right? Not every Jew and not every Catholic, but the majority of Jews and the majority of Catholics, and certainly the Catholics have a hierarchy. We have, 100 different organizations, all of which claim to be the sole representative of the Jews in this country, right? But we agree on issues of war and peace for the most part. We agree on immigration law. We agree on economic justice. We agree on the death penalty, right? There's one big issue on which Jews and Catholics disagree, and this is abortion, right? And this is where it becomes difficult, and all the more so with evangelicals, who we tend not to agree on very much with them, except for support of Israel, although what they mean by support of Israel and what most of us mean by support of Israel, not always the same thing either. But, as I've written before, right, the outcome of an argument is often determined by how it's framed, right? And Catholics and evangelicals tend to say, right, religious people are against abortion, pro-abortion people are secular liberals, right? Now, the fact of the matter is most Jews are pro-choice, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that Judaism is pro-choice, right? I mean, we live in Maryland, okay? I am going to guess that the majority of Jews in Maryland eat crab on occasion, right? It doesn't mean that Judaism is pro-crab, right? I mean, what Jews do and what Judaism teaches are not always the same thing, right? But, and this is quick because I've taught this all before, right? What does Judaism say about abortion, right? And the locus classicus is in this parsha. When men have a fight and hurt a pregnant woman so that she suffers a miscarriage but no further injury, the guilty one shall be fined as much as the woman's husband demands of him, and he shall pay in the presence of the judges. But if injury ensues, you shall give life for life, etc. Okay, so what does this mean, right? If you injure a pregnant woman causing miscarriage, you are fined. If you injure a pregnant woman and she dies, that's a capital crime. Okay, so what is the logical implication of this verse vis-a-vis the status of the fetus?
It's not live. It's not human. It's not live.
It's not a human life, right? It's not a human life because, look, for better or for worse, in the Torah, there is one penalty for murder, and that's the death penalty, right? And so if the fetus was a full human being, killing a fetus would invoke the death penalty. The fact that it invokes not the death penalty, but a fine means, now, it's not nothing, because it's still I don't know if it's a crime or a tort, but it's still, actionable, and there's still a fine, right? But it's not murder, okay? So therefore, there is no support in Judaism for a total ban on abortions, right? And if you go into the sources, which we don't have time to do now, certainly in the first trimester, I mean, the Talmud is pretty clear that the first 40 days, a fetus is considered mere water, right? A collection of cells, right? And the first trimester is, how many days math is it? Is what? 9. Okay, but so 40 days is what? 6 weeks, right? And in a lot of places, 6 weeks is sort of the cut. Now that's still early because I understand that very often women don't even realize that they're pregnant at 6 weeks, right? But the point is that a ban from conception, there's no justification for that in Judaism, right? And I gave a sermon similar to this a year ago for this same Parsha, and I never imagined, I don't think any of us imagined, that within a few months the Supreme Court would fully reverse Roe v. Wade, right? I think most of us imagined that they would allow more restrictions on Roe v. Wade, but that the precedent would still stand, right? But what's interesting is that there have been a number of lawsuits filed in states which subsequently passed laws against abortion, challenging these laws on First Amendment grounds, right? Which is absolutely the way to go, right? Because of the extreme deference that our society has historically paid to religion, right? And many of the plaintiffs are rabbis, right? Some of the plaintiffs in Missouri are friends of mine. And in one case in Florida, the plaintiff is actually a shul, okay? Because, I think you can plausibly say that a total ban on abortion is an establishment of religion, right? It essentially establishes Catholicism and evangelical Christianity as the state religion, right? And Judaism and mainstream Christianity and even Islam, which generally allows abortion, we are now second-class religions, right? So, I don't know how far any of these lawsuits will actually get, right? Because these laws are passed in conservative states, right? Which therefore tend to have conservative judiciaries. And so they may not get very far. And I suspect eventually one of them is going to wind up in federal court. And then who knows, right? But point is, we now have a sign on the lawn in front of our house that says abortion bans are against our religion, right? You can get that from the National Council of Jewish Women. Abortion bans are against our religion because it is important to challenge the framing of this issue as religious people are against abortion and secular people are pro-choice, right? I am pro-choice, and look, pro-choice means pro-choice. It doesn't mean that you agree with every decision that every person made, right? And so, you know, if in a particular, you could throw up a particular situation, and I would say, look, I think that is an inappropriate decision according to Jewish teaching. But in American law, you should have the right to make that decision. Doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but it does mean that I have to support your right to make that decision, right? But here is the flip side, and this is why this is such a difficult issue, right? I mean, I remember, I don't know, back in the 80s or 90s, I saw a bumper sticker. It had a smiley face on it, and it said, "Against abortion, don't have one," right? And here's the problem with it, right? Is that Catholics and evangelicals really believe that this is murder, right? We don't, but they do, right? And I don't know how you tell somebody, look, it's unfortunate that tens of thousands of murders take place in this country, but what you're going to do, right? I mean, and this is a real problem. And so that bumper sticker is like saying, you know, against mass shootings, don't commit one, right? Against slavery, don't own one, right? I mean, you know, and that's why it is such a difficult issue. But having said that, right, and I think, you know, I mean, I tend to be a hopeful person, not necessarily an optimistic person, but a hopeful person, right? Because right now, I mean, Roe v. Wade has made our society, I mean, the repeal of Roe v. or the overturning of Roe v. Wade has made our society even more polarized, right? But the flip side is that it's proven to be a losing political issue, right? That abortion bans and abortion restrictions are a losing political issue, and yet it seems to me that I don't want to make this political, right? But a lot of anti-abortion politicians are doubling down on their position, right? And I think what's going to happen is they're going to continue to get schmied, right? Until they realize that this is a losing proposition, right? And therefore, the national discussion should really be, how can we reduce the numbers of abortions in society, right? Because it is a case that women have abortions because they think they have no other alternative, and sometimes they really do have no other alternative, right? But sometimes they do. And if they had, you know, the wherewithal to support themselves through their pregnancy, they might take the pregnancy to term, right? Or if they had, you know, access to birth control or access, you know, to sex education, right? But the same people who are against abortion are against birth control and against sex ed, right? So they're just increasing the number of unplanned and unwanted pregnancies, right? And maybe we'll get through this period and the rhetoric will get toned down, and we'll sit down and say, what can we do to reduce the number of abortions in our society? Because the fact of the matter, and as somebody who's counseled women about abortion, it's always a tragedy. It's always a tragedy. Now, sometimes it is the least tragic alternative, right? But nobody ever joyfully has an abortion, right? And no doctor ever joyfully performs an abortion. And if we could do more as a society to make it less necessary, we would be a happier and a better society, right? But in the meanwhile, it is really important, especially if you're having a discussion with a Christian who is anti-abortion, to say, look, I understand that this is what your religion teaches, but this is what my religion teaches. And I am pro-choice, not despite being a religious Jew, but because I'm a religious Jew, right? And I want everybody to remember that phrase and drill it into your head. I am pro-choice because I am a religious Jew, and this is what my religion teaches me. I'm done. If there are comments or questions, a little late, so I don't want to go overboard, but if there are comments or questions, please go ahead. And if there are none, we'll continue with the Kaddish before Musaf, page 155 or 428, and the Musaf service, beginning on the next page. We'll say the first two pages out loud for the Kedusha,